Um, okay, we're on the air. Paul Carr and Marcia Barnhart right now. Hopefully, lots more people will be joining us soon. If not, it may be a relatively short Unseen Pub. Oh, there's Nick Nielsen. Okay, it's now a much longer Unseen Pub.
Nick.
Hello, Nick. Can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sure, I can. Yes. Do you remember Marcia?
Yes, I remember Marcia very well.
Okay.
Nick, Portland, Oregon.
And yes, Portland, Oregon. We've had some rainy days, but today it was nice.
Oh, well.
It's rainy here too. It's not unusual to be rainy in Oregon.
No, it's not. It's not. We've got our first.
Let me ask you, Nick, is anybody out there worried about this supposed tsunami that's going to happen any day now?
Well, what do you mean by any day now? You mean sometime in the next 1,000 years? Yes.
Well, it could be probably more sooner than 1,000 years.
Well, we know from the paleontological record that there are every 250 years or so really big tsunamis that hit along the west coast of North America. That happens almost everywhere in the world. That there's a coastline that fronts on an ocean, because an ocean is a big place, and as a big place, there's a lot of opportunity for earthquakes.
But isn't there like this major fault line just like a little bit out to sea?
Well, the Pacific is getting smaller and the Atlantic is getting bigger. But the significance of that is in the Atlantic you've got a seafloor spreading zone that runs down the middle of it, North America and South America and Africa. So that's spreading, and the Pacific is shrinking, and that means that the Pacific plate is being pushed down under the Asian plates on the east side and under the North American and South American plates on the west side. So it's that subduction action that's creating the Andes Mountains in South America and creates the Cascade Mountains in the Coast Range in North America. So yeah, the whole coast of Oregon and Washington, California is a subduction zone. Hi, Patrick.
Hello.
In which there's going to be earthquakes, and there's a particularly touchy zone up off the coast of Washington, off the coast of Seattle, where the Juan de Fuca plate is a separate little a plate that can pivot and move and causes earthquakes. So yeah, the whole West Coast is a subduction zone, and it is subject to earthquakes, and they will happen. It's just a question of when.
Yeah, well, I've been reading that at least some geologists are saying this is potentially a huge one.
That's
Did I miss an earthquake?
There will be a huge one eventually, but the time scale we're talking about is on the order of 250 to 1,000 years. So is it going to happen tomorrow? Well, you can't say it isn't, but you can't say a really clear likelihood, but you can say within the next 250 years we'll probably have a bad tsunami, and within the next 1,000 years we'll probably have a tsunami that's sufficient to change the coastline. But when you're talking about this time scale, we're already going to have a climatological warming event that's probably going to send the ocean up, if not a few inches, maybe a few feet. And if it gets really bad, if we get a runaway greenhouse, then we're going to have the ocean's going to go up, 100, 200, maybe up to 400 feet. And it's going to change the coastline anyway.
Yeah, well, that will happen slowly, though, relatively, versus a tsunami, which would happen fast.
But the thing is, it'll be slow but punctuated. So things like tsunamis or storms would be a trigger. So you might have a coastline in a certain position, and it seems to be pretty stable, and then you get a storm, but the ocean level has been going up gradually, and then the storm breaks some sand barrier or something, and then you never recover from the storm. The water comes in and it never goes back out again.
Well, yeah, it's only recently I've had family in Seattle, but now I have family there. So a lot of my sister's children and well, not a lot, two of them have migrated out there. My sister has 10 children, so
wow. They must be rich to have a family with 10 kids.
They are not rich, but they are frugal and disciplined.
Fruitful.
They're frugal. frugal, frugal, and
frugal.
and fertile. Yeah.
Yeah.
What part of Seattle do they live in?
I'm not sure.
I have a sister in West Seattle.
Yeah, but they're in
Renton, Kent.
they're doing well there. They seem to be enjoying themselves. They seem to like it. They're raising their children there. You know, they have babies. Well, one niece of mine has 4 children. One has 1, and so that, you know, they seem to be enjoying themselves. So it's hard for me to, you know, I just worry about them a little bit. You know, I think about the tsunamis and the earthquakes, and you know, here in Maryland we have relatively few natural disaster potentials. We you know, we're first down in the nuclear strike, but you know, we don't have much in the way of you know, we
Catastrophic national disaster.
yeah, you know, we get occasional floods, but my house is a good 30 feet above the nearest creek. So
Seattle is a very hilly city, so even if the ocean levels went up significantly, most of Seattle would still be above the water, and you just have a bigger the big Puget Sound, which is open to the ocean. So ocean going ships can come right off the ocean into Puget Sound and go directly into the Seattle port without having to have a river pilot or a bar pilot like they do in Oregon for the Columbia River.
Yeah, we got to get out there. You know, my daughter is researching colleges, and she recently found a college near Portland that she looked at their website and fell in love with it.
Which one?
Oh, I can't remember.
Linfield?
No, it's a small college. I can't remember the name of it, but I didn't come prepared with that. But my wife is saying no West Coast schools. Mid-Atlantic. We're focusing on the Mid-Atlantic, and the reality is, you know, she could go to University of Maryland or College Park, which is her grades are good. Her grades are good enough to get in there, and
yeah, but the tradition is children hop to the opposite coast to be as far away from their parents as possible.
That was me in 1976. I wanted to get the hell out. Right? Even I didn't hate my parents. I wasn't mad. I just wanted to get the hell out.
I've talked to many people whose kids have gone to the opposite coast, and they don't dislike their kids, and the kids don't dislike their parents. They just want some space.
Yeah.
And you know, if it takes 3,000, 4,000 miles to get some space, that's okay.
I only went about 1,000 miles. I was, you know, kind of a homebody. And the thing is, I lived in Texas. I could have stayed in Texas and gone 1,000 miles, or 800, at least 800 miles. But you know, you know, yeah, I understand that feeling totally. And this, I looked at the website of this school myself, and I thought it looked really good, like a really great school. But Portland, you know, when we're back here in Maryland, you know, it's just like, you know, no. There will be a time when she lives a long way away from us, and we'll just have to accept that. But you know, it's hard to let go. But University of Maryland College Park is a very good school. We can afford the tuition quite easily. It's because we're in state, and she has good grades. She could get in. It's actually quite a selective school. You know, you think of state schools as being anybody gets in, but not this one. In fact, most Maryland universities are pretty tough to get into. 70% of the freshmen at U Maryland graduate in the top 10% of their class. And you know, when I was a kid, you know, big state schools, like everybody you just walk in, they say you're accepted. But you know,
well, what degree does she want to get? What's her discipline? I mean,
well, she's interested in a lot of things, but psychology is really kind of where she's headed, I think, right now. Which, you know, that's not a surprising. Both of my wife's parents were PhDs in psychology, and my wife is a PhD in sociology. So social sciences is in her blood. Well, I don't know if psychology is a social science or it's more of it's kind of moving more towards neuroscience now, but and cognitive science, but it used to be considered more of a social science. But PhD psychologists now are relatively rigorous, and they do pretty tightly controlled studies. Not all psychologists hit the same standard, but I would be okay if she went with psychology.
What drives her towards that? I mean, what is it about her?
Well, she's taking AP psychology this year, and she's really fascinated with it.
Why? Because she just wants to know what motivates people's behaviors in the.
Well, and well, one thing is that they started talking about pharmacology. She got interested in that, and how drugs affect people's brains, which not too many teenagers aren't interested in that. But usually not from a scientific perspective. But she's actually.
It's research.
It's research, yeah. Well, yeah, research.
It's all for science.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what they say when they take a toke. Science.
Of course, that's what I did. It was all research. Yeah.
Well, but I'm very encouraged. She's a very good student, and she works hard. And she works hard on the stuff she doesn't. She even works hard on the stuff she doesn't really not passionate about. So, which is a good sign. That's the sort of thing that you have to be able to do to succeed well in college. So I have high hopes. Her brother is a fair bit younger, and his interests are more diffuse right now. But I'm sure he'll focus more as he gets older. Right now, all he cares about is the Beatles and playing music, which is great. When you're 13, that live it up. Enjoy being 13. Patrick, how you been doing? You haven't said a word yet.
I kind of cut into a conversation. I wasn't sure where to cut in.
Cut it anytime you want. It's a pub.
I was thinking about those earthquake things. We just recently had a couple of earthquakes in Mexico, and what was the other one? And I thought it was
Iraq, Iran. Yeah.
Well, that was most recently, but I'm talking about along the Ring of Fire, along the West Coast here. Well, not just here.
You're on the West Coast now.
Here in the United States.
Oh. Planet Earth, anyway.
But actually, it was further south. It was Mexico, and then it was one of the island countries. I don't know. But anyway, I'm just
Puerto Rico.
No.
But Puerto Rico had a hurricane.
Wasn't it?
But anyway, I was thinking that the infamous West Coast San Andreas Fault is also part of the Ring of Fire, and I'm thinking that we've recently had a couple of few earthquakes that were some minor, some major, big major, that may be a sign that the big one is coming.
No, I don't think there's much evidence that.
I think there's a lot of
the big one gives itself away, right? I mean, you look at the big earthquakes that have happened. There's not a whole lot of warning.
No, and in fact,
it was an 8 point something. It was a big one. It was huge.
Yeah.
And talking a lot about an earthquake that might be coming soon to Yellowstone. There's been.
The volcano.
Yellowstone is another. Yellowstone is a caldera.
Super volcano.
It's a super
over geological time. Yes, Yellowstone will become a super volcano and probably spread magma over about 5 states.
Volcanoes happen because of plate tectonic movement.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy real estate in Wyoming anytime in the next 300 or 400 years.
Yeah, but it's not part of the what they call the Ring of Fire, which
it's a weak spot in the crust.
Ocean, which goes along the California coast.
Well, the Ring of Fire is where the subduction zones are. That's where the plates are moving underneath each other, and that causes moderate volcanoes. But the super volcanoes are different, and there's one in Italy that may be about to blow.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, and if it blows, it could be a huge impact on Europe,
the entire planet.
If a super volcano goes, it can be really bad, because it was a Siberian trapped supervolcano event that probably was one of the major causes of the end Permian mass extinction, which was the worst mass extinction in Earth's history.
Well, that was that was an event that may not ever be duplicated. That was huge.
Well, obviously, we're
It
talking
went on for a long time.
I mean, I was talking about the Ring of
Yeah.
Fire, which the San Andreas Fault's part of, but the Yellowstone caldera is a whole different system.
Yeah, that's a weak spot in the crust where magma wells up.
Right, but they've been
It's
measuring
gonna
it. The last documentary I saw on it was a couple of years ago, and they've been measuring land, the bubble growing.
Yeah,
In a measurable
it's going to rise and fall over time. It may not indicate what they don't really have a way to forecast what's going to happen yet.
No, but it is.
However, if they do say
nerve-wracking.
it's about to go, get the hell out of there. Get as far away, go to like Argentina.
I don't think Yellowstone is about to go as soon as the big earthquake in California is about to come. I think that's going to be sooner.
Okay, let's get this. Wait a minute. Let's get this on a prediction website so you can be held accountable for your
world according to Patman.
Your geophysical forecasting.
That's right. My Patman's geophysical forecast is that California's big earthquake is going to happen before Yellowstone goes.
I personally think I have no goddamn idea what's going to blow when, but. I think I'm in good company. I think a lot of geologists would say they don't have any idea either.
Here's something funny for you. A few years ago, we actually had an earthquake here on the East Coast. I was laying over there on my bed, my couch, and I was half asleep. And it felt like somebody just like got behind the couch and gave it a good shove, which can't be done because it's actually against the outside wall.
Okay, you're sheltered. You've never lived in California.
We really had a point something earthquake here, and I was like, that was.
Yeah, I remember that earthquake, and it was very minor compared to what you get.
Oh yeah,
but it was once a week in Los Angeles.
I mean, I got up and the cups hanging on the hooks were swinging, and I was like, "What the hell? What the hell was that?"
That's nothing. It's nothing.
Well, don't geologists have planted a lot of seismic equipment along the faults, even the one up into Oklahoma and up to Missouri? There's a lot of seismic meters to read tiny little pulses from the earth. And I'm thinking they put that down because they kind of had some sense that they could, if they got some data, they could determine maybe something was beginning to build. I don't know why they put all those seismic readers all along there unless they felt they were going to get some useful data.
They are. That's how they
get them. But it's still a very young science.
Yes, it is.
It's
but
not.
Where did you hear, Paul, that there was supposed to be some cataclysmic event coming
up? This has been known for years that there's a huge lava dome under Yellowstone and that it's blown multiple times in the past.
Right.
Over time scales of hundreds of thousands of years.
Millennia.
And that every time it's blown, it's been a big catastrophe. But before hundreds of thousands of years ago, nobody lived here. It was just a bunch of buffalo and whatever, some saber-tooth tigers, maybe, but there was no humans. And now we have all this population. What people think is flyover country is actually quite heavily populated and farmed. And if that blew, not only would we have a lot of casualties, we would have a lot of lost agricultural production.
It's an earth-changing phenomenon.
Well, there's definitely been a lot of chatter about a Yellowstone event, a large cataclysmic Yellowstone event, but I don't know. I haven't heard.
It could be 10,000 years away. It could be. It could be next week. We don't know.
From a geological perspective, 10,000 years is insignificant. So you have to keep.
There's areas in Yellowstone where you could walk around and actually see. You're not allowed to go near there, but there's like active lava flows.
Yeah, have you been to Yellowstone yet, you guys?
I've never been there.
You better get there before it blows, Patrick.
Well, I figured I'd wait until it's about to go.
In my childhood, I went to Jellystone Park many times, but and I took a picnic basket with me.
Seriously, have you been to Yellowstone? Patrick, you haven't. Paul, have you?
I have not been to Yellowstone. No,
I have not either. No.
I've been to most of the major national parks, but not that one.
I went to the Crystal Caves here in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, you're done. That's your bucket list right there.
Yeah. Well,
Crystal Cave
Yellowstone
Ridge.
isn't that far away for you, Nick.
No,
I
it's,
went there.
it's not that far away, but I don't tend to get out and do things in the United States. So when I travel, I tend to go to other countries.
Well,
Well, I was married at the time, and I had small children at the time, and we took them there.
I'll tell you, I've been to 26 different countries, and I find that the United States of America is a pretty awesome place to go travel.
I love traveling in the West. I just haven't been to Wyoming.
Yeah.
I love New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, California. All that. I haven't done much of Nevada yet, but I sort of just tipped my toe in Nevada. But yeah, it's all great. And if you live on the East Coast and you get out there, you realize it's almost like you're a different planet.
Yeah.
Because the horizons are so much bigger.
And you can see the stars.
Well, you can actually see the stars at night. Yeah. And you can, you're probably 5,000-6,000 feet up.
I haven't been very far at all. The only other country I've ever been to when I was a kid in the Boy Scouts was Canada. I went to Montreal when the Canadian National Tower was just finished. And the furthest south I've been is District of Columbia when I went to the Reason Rally in Washington, D.C.
You need to get out, Patrick.
Yeah, rent yourself.
At least go to Italy, the old country.
That was thanks to the generosity of a friend because I had really not enough money to do that myself.
Well,
I recently learned that there's a museum in BC that has a almost perfectly preserved ankylosaurus, and that's something I would really like to see. So I've been toying with that idea.
Which one is that? Is that the Natural History Museum?
I would have to look it up. I read about it about a month ago.
Because I've been there 3 or 4 times, but I can't remember the exact dinosaurs they have.
Yeah, well,
which did you mention, Paul?
The Natural History Museum.
Yeah, well, since we were in Washington D.C. the next morning, we're
Patrick's a hop, skip, and a jump from the Natural History Museum in New York City, which is awesome.
No, I mean, in Washington D.C. we went.
Yeah,
because we were there right after the day after the Reason Rally. We went there.
Yeah. There's a lot of good. I mean, I definitely recommend doing the round of the Smithsonian's if you get down to DC. I mean, the political stuff's not that interesting. I'd much rather go to air and space. Yeah, but I live in DC. I live just a short train ride from DC, so it's.
I actually have some pictures.
Yeah.
Of some of the display, some of the exhibits in the.
Yeah, the Natural History Museum there is really, it's not huge like the New York one. It doesn't, but it's pretty good. New York has the Natural History Museum in New York City is gigantic, and it's got all these big dinosaurs bone replicas. I definitely recommend that. And they have the meteorite room at New York is fantastic.
I was there, but it was a very long time ago. Again, I was.
You should go. It's a short train ride from where you live.
But yeah, I don't get out much.
Yeah, New York City is. I mean, I wish I could. When I lived in New Jersey, I used to go to New York City all the time. That's the main reason for living in New Jersey. The
worst thing I did was the worst thing I did in New York was go to the Ted Nugent concert in Madison Square Garden when I was a teenager. It damaged my ears.
Could damage your brain in other ways too.
The museum is the Royal Tyrrell Museum. It's not particularly well known. So
Royal Tyrrell. I know I haven't been there.
The Royal Tyrrell Museum. Like it's in Alberta. Okay, I said BC. Okay, I said BC. I'm wrong. It's in Alberta.
I thought you said DC.
Oh, I know. I said BC.
Oh.
Meaning British Columbia, but it's in Alberta.
I need a BC powder right now.
I went to Montreal when I was in the Boy Scouts. We had went to see the CN Tower. You get up on the CN Tower and the train tracks look like HO scale.
Well, yeah, Montreal's okay. I like the fact that you walk into in Montreal, you walk into a restaurant or whatever, and they say, "Bonjour, good evening," and you reply in the language of your choice. It's very bilingual place, which I like. I like that.
I have heard that in French-speaking Canada, if you want to speak English, speak French first badly, and they'll immediately switch to English because they'll be better at it than
that's
you.
true
But if you
almost
want,
everywhere.
but if you want to speak French, insist on speaking English first, and then they will refuse to speak English.
Well, yeah, in Canada, they're pretty accommodating. They pretty much all speak both languages in Quebec province. So, which is where Montreal is, of course. But because they have to. And if you fly Air Canada, all the announcements are in English and French, which is kind of silly on most of the flights. I mean, if you're flying to Western Canada, more people are more likely to speak Ukrainian than French. But they do that. It's just a national policy. They're a bilingual country, and
I can't read this whole thing because my eyes are.
We're fast becoming a bilingual country. Here,
What is the name of this dinosaur?
An ankylosaurus.
Oh, it's an ankylosaurus.
It's one of the best preserved ankylosauruses ever found. If you look in the chat, you'll see I linked to an article from National Geographic about.
That's what I clicked on. That's what I clicked. That's what I was looking at. But my eyes, I can't stand the bright white, and I couldn't read the whole thing.
Oh.
Wear your shades, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can, if you have a Mac, you can put it into the late night mode.
Some websites allow you to do that.
Yeah, there's a night mode for Twitter.
I do. I like that. I think it's actually calming.
Yeah, I have all my stuff in the dark background, but on the website you don't always have that option.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you, so guys. This week my big drama was I got contacted by Doug Vakoch in the middle of the week, and he said, in a couple of days, we're putting out this press release about how we send a message to a nearby star. And I said, okay. And he says, would you like to do an interview for your podcast? And I said, yes. Although I am torn about this, I'd be happy to do the interview. And this, Doug's been on a couple times before on the Wow Signal, quite recently, actually. And I said, sure, let's get on and talk about what you did. And this was before the press release came out Wednesday night. The press release came out Thursday morning, which was about noon European time. And it turns out it was this message that was sent to a nearby star was coordinated with a music festival they do in Spain every year, which is kind of like a electronic music festival. It's called the Sonar. And I have to admit, I have little insight into the music festival, but although I did recognize the names of some of the people that involved in it. And I talked to Doug and he said, well, in October, last month, we sent, for 3 days, we sent messages to a nearby star, which we know has a planet in the habitable zone. It's super Earth type planet, called Lichen star. It's also called GJ273. And the planet, there's known to have two planets, which were announced only this year. They've been observing this star for over a decade, but they just announced this year they were sure that there were two planets there. And one of the planets is a fairly large planet in the habitable zone of this fairly dim red star. And they sent this message, which was what they called a tutorial, which helps with the idea is to sort of gradually build up a language in the radio signals and then they sent some music from the festival, and next April they're going to send more music.
How far away is this?
It's only about 12 light years. It's pretty close.
Is it one of the Gliese? Is GJ?
GJ273b. It's pretty close.
Is that Gliese? Gliese?
Gliese. But it's just, if you look up Luyten star, Luytens, it'll come up. It's been a known star for a long time. But it hasn't been it hasn't been known that it has planets for long at all. It just published earlier this year, and it was a radial velocity discovery. That is, they discovered it by looking at the very subtle shifts in the spectrum of the star that were moving around, and therefore indicated that there were planets around the star, very close to the star. These planets are much closer than Mercury is to the sun, but it's a relatively dim star, so like less than 1% of the sun's brightness. So it has so you have to be close to get enough.
Are you talking about the most recent one they were talking about?
No, that's Ross 128.
Ross 128. Yeah, that came. That's coincidental. A lot of people got them confused. Ross 128 is a different star. It's also quite close.
There was one that I was just looking at a few months ago that like you said, the whole system can fit inside the orbit of Mercury.
Well, that's You might be thinking of TRAPPIST-1.
TRAPPIST. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you spell that other one? How do you spell the first one that you were talking about?
GJ273. If you look it up on Simbad, it'll come right up.
Or Luytens.
Or the exoplanet, the Open Exoplanet catalog has it. Or you can just go to wowsignalpodcast.com and click on the links.
I just wanted to type it into Google.
No,
okay, here it is.
Google. Why would you use Google when you have wowsignalpodcast.com?
It's in the Canis Minor constellation it was talking about. Now, Paul,
yeah,
what do you think about the few people, big brains amongst them, that say this kind of messaging is irresponsible and dangerous?
Well, I'm torn about that. I mean, I understand the notion that you have these low risk, high consequence things that you have to worry about, but I really am extremely skeptical that there would be a hostile civilization at this star that would say, oh, now we know that there's people or beings at this star that we want to kill, and who didn't know that before?
Or not necessarily kill, but maybe
eat, enslave, whatever, do bad things to
steal power, or
get elected president of whatever.
But it's that typical false thinking that just because somebody or something is brighter, that they are altruistic. That is not. It doesn't follow.
Well, I don't. They don't need to be altruistic. They just need to be. They need to be indifferent, right? They don't have to say, "Oh, we love these." These little beings, these little monkeys at Sol. We love them so much. They're so cute. They don't have to think that at all. All they have to do is think, "Oh, well, we've known there was a civilization there for hundreds of years because they would have."
Most sentient beings are not indifferent until they find out what they're looking at.
Well, but think of it this way: if you have the ability to cross even 12 light years of distance with a hostile force, that's an incredible technical achievement compared to what we can do. You have the ability, then you almost certainly have the ability to know that already know that we're here, and 12 light years away.
We're here, but you don't know the particulars of the civilization. I mean, my God, we know something's out there, but we know nothing about that something. So they could know something's in this neighborhood here in this little far-flung galaxy out here on the.
Well, we're talking about a much more advanced civilization than we have technologically. Because look at it this way. I mean, if you're really worried about them coming to get us, just on a whim, like, oh, we don't like their face or whatever, or we don't like their music. That, well, okay, that I can understand, but
don't send them stupid.
I mean, they might come get us just because of Bruno Mars, but that would be, that would be fair. But the notion that if you've got this, the problem is crossing interstellar distances with any kind of material, any kind of energy reserve, is something that's way beyond what we can do right now.
Well, but that's where we always argue the point. We don't know enough to realize perhaps that there's a much easier way to get from point A to point Z.
Well, we do know there's no easy way, because if there was, they'd be all over the place.
We don't know diddly squat, Paul.
Yes, we do know diddly squat. I think I would argue that we know diddly squat.
No.
In fact, we know probably better than diddly squat. We can verify what we know about physics very, very well.
Okay, here's what we do know. Luton's star is GJ273, is a red dwarf in a constellation Canis Minor, located at a distance of approximately 12.36 light years, or 3.79 parsecs from the sun. So we do know some diddly and even some squat.
Oh, I think we know diddly, and then some more than diddly about the star. The star itself is actually very well studied.
But I'm gonna have to agree with you, though. I mean, if there was a, first of all, in order to cross that distance with a force to fight an entire planet, it would be an incredible leap of technology. Number one, and number two, they would have been here already.
Yeah, they probably would already be here, and it would probably already. And if they didn't like our music, or they didn't like us, or they just didn't like monkeys, they would have already killed us.
Or if the music that we sent them was like a weapon to them, and it damaged a lot of them, then they might,
Well, I mean, that I can believe.
False assumptions, you guys are coming from such a.
I mean, have you heard disco? Do you remember disco?
Oh my God! Excuse the pun.
We deserve to die just because of disco. But
what were we thinking?
I'd like to point out that Marcia's earlier observation of the idea that higher intelligence doesn't necessarily come with altruism has been formalized in an idea that has been called the orthogonality thesis, that I think was first formulated by Nick Bostrom, who has become famous for his work on existential risk. Anyway, in a couple papers in his book on superintelligence, he formulates the orthogonality thesis, which many people were argued about since, which is precisely the idea that there is no relationship between intelligence and moral faculties.
Well, altruism isn't necessarily a moral faculty. Altruism is a very human
well, for
invention.
lack of a better term, we have to come from this centrist term because we can't think like aliens. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot assume that just because somebody is exceedingly intelligent, they are also exceedingly benevolent. You can't.
No, that's not an assumption. That's not an assumption. I'm saying, I just from the pure business case, there's no business case for coming to destroy us, based on anything.
Well, it could be argued not to destroy us, but to plunder resources. It could be that something we find here is.
Well, no, what resource could we possibly have that would be worth traveling 12 light years to get?
I answered.
How would I know?
The most viewed answer I have on Quora is exactly that question. Why would aliens cross interstellar distances to come to Earth? And I said the only conceivable reason why anyone would go to another star system if they have that kind of technology that they could do that would be for the unique products of a biosphere that's almost 4 billion years old. Because if you had the kind of technology that made it possible to cross interstellar distances, you'd be able to make anything you wanted at home.
So bacon, basically, they want bacon.
Well, or luxury goods. Maybe they want a zebra handbag. Maybe they want wood products made from wood on Earth, and there's nothing like wood.
No, they just want to serve man.
On a side note,
to serve man. Yeah.
On a side note, altruism isn't a strictly human thing. Altruism.
Well, no, I agree with that, Patrick. But I mean,
sentient animals,
altruism. Animals evolve altruism for good evolutionary reasons.
Well, I just finished. You just finished saying it was a human thing.
Well, I mean, we've invented this notion of altruism.
Well, I guess
which is really just, there's a lot of ways to frame that, but you don't need to argue altruism to say that we don't want to kill you. We can just say we don't care whether you live or die. Is enough to leave us alone.
You could make the argument that altruism is indifference.
Okay, let's hear that argument.
Yeah, you are indifferent as to whether something lives or dies, so you have no compulsion to kill something or to change it, just to observe it. And
Well, it's just, let's think of it in terms of economics. The one thing that I'm confident of is that as you go, if as you move out into the galaxy and discover civilizations, they will behave in a way that they perceive as their self-interest.
I got another one for you. There's another one of Pat Man's predictions, or Pat Man.
I didn't hear they would behave in a way that what?
They'll perceive as their self-interest. In other words, in a broad sense, what is the business case for doing something? You know,
What's the impetus for doing anything?
yeah,
And
what's the drive? What's driving you? Now, the business case is a value judgment, right? It depends on what you want to get versus what you have to give to get it, right? And it doesn't matter whether that what you.
I lost you again.
Oh, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I'm not.
I was
I'm not
waiting
hearing.
for my computer. We lost you, Paul.
The aliens have just taken Paul out.
They didn't like what he was saying. Well,
No, they
while
don't
while
like
he's
that whole
cleaning up his
business
computer,
thing.
I wanted to say something that has something to do with altruism, in a sense that my insight, so to speak, into the galaxy. Another Pat Man's prediction. We are basically all made of the same star stuff. So whatever destruction of a nearby star system before we became a solar system that injected us with its material also injected
Back?
Yeah.
Yes.
also
Okay.
injected the surrounding area. So star systems with any intelligent or any life at all on them in our neighborhood, so many parsecs away, are likely to have very similar life forms, including some of the animals and the apes and the people. So there is a sort of Star Trekking kind of like logic to the all these humanoids that live in different places in the nearby systems.
There's a fellow who argues a very strong case of constraint in that way, called Simon Conway Morris. He's written a couple books that argue for the inevitability of certain forms coming out of evolution.
Who was that? Who was that, Nick? I missed it.
Simon Conway Morris.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it just kind of makes sense. Although you can imagine something like more of like a Titan type of environment where you would get not only different chemistry, but you could get radically different life forms.
That's true, but I'm thinking like, what about mammals and
I mean, my God, think of the radical different life forms we have on this one planet, you guys.
right.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, we do.
I mean, the
but
kind of life forms that might come out of a methane, icy methane world like Titan is likely to be small, microbial, very strange life. What they call.
it might be microbial. I mean,
or gigantic gaseous forms, plasma form type life.
yeah, we really don't know. I mean, we're just still kind of in the baby steps of astrobiology.
Because we know nothing.
Well, I would say we know nothing. We know a lot about chemistry.
We know important things about how evolution works, and we know important things about how ecology works. So, I would say that Patrick is probably right. The chemistry of our local area is going to be lead to very similar self-replicating macromolecules. They might not use exactly the GCAT group of chemicals, but probably something pretty similar. But the further you get away, the less true that is. So then you can go further than that and predict that if you get a biosphere with self-replicating macromolecules and you give it enough time to develop, it's going to develop ecological niches, and it's going to develop a trophic pyramid. So there'll be a broad layer of primary producers, and then a smaller number of herbivores, a smaller number of predators, and a very small number of apex predators on the top of that trophic pyramid. And you could go further and say there's going to be particular marine niches, particular land niches, particular aerial niches. So there are things that you could say, but it doesn't constrain this enough to sketch out life on other worlds. And I mean, in terms of their.
We could also say that there has been plenty of time for that to happen. We know what happened here in 4.5–5 billion years, and we're relatively young. And when you look to where the earlier in time, we know surely there must be life forms that were built out of the same soup we were made out of, and arranged, we don't know, but it has been often put forth that the arrangement of life is going to be relatively simple because of, one, the same materials, two, the same frequencies that exist there. You know, when you put, and this is very strange, but when you put some metal filings on a magnet and add a frequency, it automatically puts itself into particular patterns depending upon the frequency. And it's been said that the frequency that is existing in the universe helps form patterns of matter. And I rather think that's the case. And patterns of matter is what we are. We are matter.
Yeah, but we know a lot about electromagnetism and how it works.
You know, one of my favorite sci-fi.
In spite of Insane Clown Posse's,
you know, Marcia,
what I'm saying here, let me clarify. What I'm saying here is matter forms in specific patterns, and those patterns are created by frequency.
Well, no, those patterns are created by quantum mechanics, and that's very well understood.
You know, Marcia, there's one of my favorite sci-fi writers, Anne McCaffrey, who explores the idea of.
And what do we know about quantum mechanics, Paul?
A lot.
Who explores the idea of how different species might be on different planets, the similarities and the differences. One of her best ones, besides the Dragon series, was the Freedom series, the Freedom Landing, Freedom Choice series, where they were Earth was being invaded and people were being taken and dropped off on some other far off planet that was considered habitable for them to do whatever they want to do. And to make a long story short, there was also Deskies, and the Katanis were the ones that were taking the people, but the Katanis were also being controlled by these bigger, more superior species. But the differences of the different species that were being dropped off on this sort of, penal colony planet varied in many ways, but were similar in some other ways. For example, the Deskies were very frail, but they had super hearing. And the diet wasn't being satisfied by the planet's own vegetation and stuff like that. They had to find ways of feeding them. Where the Katanis were very large and very strong because their planet was like twice the gravity or something of Earth's or something like that, you know. But she explored the slight differences and the major differences, and all these people ended up colonizing this planet and lived together. But the idea I have here is that she was able to sort of imaginative way of exploring the possibilities of the differences between humanoids and things like that. And the animals, there was what they called moo cows. They had 6 legs, and they were very large, like elephant size. And the reason for that, and they were talking about the evolutionary reasoning for that was because there was also these night creatures that came out of the dirt and basically, scavenged. And if you were standing out there at night, you would be in trouble because you would be eaten alive. So when you stamp on the ground, it chases them away. So these moo cows were able to, walk around and make a lot of earth-shaking noise, that sort of thing. But it was very interesting the way she explored that idea.
Well, yes, but it's just a work of fiction. Somebody just pulled that right out of their frontal lobe. Hell, I could make something up. It doesn't make it at all.
It's just the idea that, science fiction writers all have this, way of thinking about science in order to sort of squeeze it into their fiction. And I thought it was an imaginative way for her to, Anne McCaffrey to.
I think we know right now with our extensive biosphere, we know now that you can have an extraordinary variety of life forms on the exact same planet under the exact same exertions of energy and gravity and all that. I mean, it's clear that there's a lot of variety and not just on the earth. I think it's pretty clear. You can see
Yeah, there's a lot of variety, but it's very tightly constrained. And even the very different forms of flora and fauna that we've had over 3.5 to 4 billion years have used the same.
Tightly constrained, Nick. Explain what you mean by tightly constrained.
I am about to.
Okay.
The basic self-replicating mechanism of DNA has been virtually unchanged since it first came into being. And people who engage in biologists who do what's called molecular phylogeny, they go into detail, they go into DNA and they dig through the code in great detail, and you can determine how frequent the relative frequency of mutations, and then you can find what has mutations in common, and then you can trace it all the way back to what's called LUCA, LCA, the last common ancestor. LUCA is the last universal common ancestor, and it is by that process of molecular phylogeny that you get down to this root, and that you have in common with bananas and with the extinct pterodactyls and mushrooms. We've all got that same self-replicating DNA sequence at the base. It's all the same guanine, cytosine, toluene, and adenine. It's all the same 4 chemicals. It's all self-replicating in the same way. Yes, life gets much more complicated and builds up different forms, and there's a mass extinction and new forms come up, but it's all the same root that can be traced back to the last universal common ancestor. So we're all derived from the same one.
Speaking of DNA, Anne McCaffrey also explored a different type of DNA they call PNA in her Dragon series. Of course, it was a much more fantastical kind of science fiction, but the DNA had 3 strands instead of 2.
Well, if you're really interested in dragons, Patrick, you read some of the Terry Pratchett's books about dragons, Discworld.
I told you a long time ago, I'm not a big fan of Terry Pratchett.
He wrote about dragons in a very humorous and way. It sort of says, well, okay, this is impossible, but here's some things about dragons. And it's fun. It was funny. Anyway,
I think what's more interesting to me about colonizing the planet and everything, because Pern is a planet, that they went to, they left Earth and they colonized the planet and they started fresh there. They didn't know about this rogue planet. It was also a red planet that every 500 years or 250 years, I think it is, transferred this microbiological stuff they called thread, which ate everything except for rock. And the ancestors of the first colonizers genetically engineered the fire lizards there, which were lizards that were able to eat a certain phosphorus rock and breathe fire, and they turned them into dragons, literally dragons, and they called them dragons because they resembled the mythical dragons of Earth. And every so often, every 250 years or whatever, they'd have to fly these dragons and burn the incoming thread.
Okay.
But it was more of a colonization, was more of a space exploration type of science fiction.
It wasn't
because I like dragons. It was because of the.
What Nick was saying, my favorite metaphor, and maybe just I haven't seen enough metaphors yet, but is Dan Dennett's book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. He talks about the library of Mendel. And in the library of Mendel, you have all these possible genomes, but only a very, very thin strand of them are actually realizable genomes that would survive, right? And you can work your way through the library of Mendel and find all the creatures that have existed on Earth, and maybe some that could have existed but didn't. And for example, there's no evidence there was ever a technologically advanced dinosaur, that could actually that had advanced cognitive capabilities. But why not? Why wouldn't there have been? It was in the library of Mendel, just that it remained in the fiction section.
I'm gonna have to look that up, but yeah, that's not a new concept. I mean, even Star Trek.
No, it's not a new concept. It's just that it's a new metaphor.
Well, it's a biological version of what Jorge Luis Borges called the Library of Babel, which is a famous short story in which he talks about a library that has every possible book in it. So what Dennett is saying is that you can imagine, given the basic DNA material, the library of all possible forms of life. And some of these are not going to be viable. Some of these are going to be viable that they never evolved, and some of them are viable and they did evolve, and that's our actual history.
The actual paths to the library that are life on Earth are quite thin compared to the total library, but still, it's a massive library. So you have you can spend your whole life going through following these strands through the library, and yeah, that's a great book. It has so many good everything in Dennett has lots of good metaphors. Even if you don't agree with him, his conclusions, you'll end up with these great thinking tools that will help you conceptualize some of this really complex material. Like,
I think the Darwin's Dangerous Idea is probably his best books. I don't think much of his more recent books, but I enjoyed Darwin's Dangerous Idea.
That everybody should read that book. I mean, it's not just a rehash of biology. There's a lot more to it than that. In fact,
Darwin's Dangerous Idea, is it by Darwin or is it by somebody else?
Dennett, by Dan
Dennett.
Okay.
It's a modern book. He's still alive.
Okay.
Yes, in fact, I just posted he gave a presentation in Krakow recently that was on the Copernicus Center YouTube channel. I posted a link to that.
Do you think it might be an audiobook?
It probably is. Yeah.
Very likely, depending on what companies you go to.
Yeah, I'm sure it's on Audible.
I don't think I can find it on the library.
Yeah.
Good chance of it. Very good chance of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's another good metaphor in there that comes to mind right away, which is skyhooks versus cranes, and the notion that our abstractions about the world sort of build up in layers using cranes, and as we go from fundamental physics to chemistry to biochemistry to biology to to neurobiology and so on, all the way up to the most complex things that we study. But in each case, each level, there are cranes. That is ways of going from, say, quantum physics to chemistry that involve no miracles. Just going, just saying, well, here's an abstraction, here's an emergent property, here's an approximation that gets us from understanding electrons to understanding atoms, and and then we go from understanding atoms to understanding chemical reactions and so forth, and all those things are. And what Dennett says is that people are always trying to do skyhooks where there's some kind of a miracle that takes us from one level to another. Mm-hmm. And no skyhooks and it basically says no skyhooks. Let's just stick with the cranes. And that's a really unsophisticated way of explaining like 2 chapters in his book. But, I recommend reading it. In other books, he said no wonder tissue. There's nothing in our brains that miraculous. It's a slow buildup of competences over millions and millions of years that leads to cognition and doing things, doing things not only competently but understanding the reasons why we do them is something that's an additional competence that's layered on top of everything else, and that is gosh, I'm totally failing at explaining that, but
yeah, I'm lost.
Well, I think if you read Darwin's Dangerous Idea, you'll get a lot of good. I mean, even if you don't agree with Dennett on his conclusions, you'll get some good ways of framing the ideas.
what he calls in a later book intuition pumps.
Yes, intuition pumps are. I have that. I read that book a lot. Intuition pumps and other tools for thinking. Even if you don't, like I said,
Yeah,
even
I agree. It's useful even if you don't agree with it. And of course,
You talk about
good
Daniel
writing.
Dennett, wasn't he a magician?
no, I don't know who you're referring to.
James Randi, maybe.
Oh, James Randi.
He looks a little bit like James Randi, so he's
Okay,
taller.
I'm thinking about James Randi. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, James Randi started out as a magician. Then he spent his most of his career
That's right.
debunking other people's claims to supernaturalistic
Right.
phenomenon or
Yeah. My bad. Too
phenomenon.
many wines. Sorry.
They're both advanced in age, and they both have big beards. But beyond that, I don't think there's much.
Yeah, that's what it is. The picture in my head is.
Yeah,
Right. The big beard.
James Randi is a tiny little man. He's like what, 5'2", 5'3".
Yeah, he is, because I saw him at the Reason Rally. I think he was there.
Yeah,
Dan Dennett would make a great Santa Claus because he's a big roly-poly guy.
yeah. And they have very different voices too.
Yeah.
Randy is fun to listen to as well, but Randy has a very different focus. He's not a philosopher. He's more of a here's how you fool people, and I know how these people fooled you. Which is actually a great skill to have. I mean, I'm really very impressed with people who can do magic effectively.
Yeah.
I don't even know how they start on that, but
Well, both, like I said, it was just a brain fart. I had these pictures in my head. I confused the both of them.
Yeah. Dan Dennett looks like Santa Claus, basically.
Both of them are big in the, well, how can I say I don't like to call it a movement, but that's what they're calling it, the atheist movement. They're both
Or you can call it the skeptics.
Well, yeah.
They're both big players in the
well, Dennett does not emphasize atheism at all.
No, but he's
but he is identified with the four horsemen.
Yeah, he is, but and he is an atheist, but he's not. I don't think atheism interests him much.
No.
It's not what he's interested in. It's what people like me look up to or look towards.
Yeah, well, atheism is basically here's one thing I don't believe in, but there's lots of other things you don't believe in too, right?
Is what they're saying, really.
I'm sorry, Marcia, you're very low.
I said, really, isn't the argument he's making is that there is no intelligence behind this design? It's just algorithmic happenstance.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not no, it's not just happenstance. There's a very sophisticated idea of what's going on there.
It's randomness plays an element in it, and but randomness is the mutation is randomness, but the selection isn't random. The selection is made by what came before and what allows what comes later to survive.
Yeah, and
so
it's an algorithm, and it's an algorithm that has a very powerful. After a lot of iterations, has a very powerful effect.
Can have had that effect on Earth.
Yeah.
It sets into motion a bunch of processes, and those processes then end up orienting themselves into life forms.
Well, the processes compete with each other.
It happened on Earth. We don't know. This might be an incredibly rare phenomenon, and then we're just a fluke. But we don't see ourselves as a fluke because we're familiar with what we are, and we seem, to be perfectly normal. But we have no idea.
I can't imagine anybody in this day and age who could possibly think that's that we might be the only ones that this randomly happened to, that nowhere else in the universe life forms exist that are of some type of
I know what you're saying, Marcia. I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people that can't possibly think.
Well, but that's the argument for credulity, right? I mean, you can't, just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean it can't be true. It is possible, and we haven't.
And we've got the great silence and the Fermi paradox, and nobody hasn't. There are hundreds of ways to respond to the Fermi paradox, but none of them commands the respect of everyone.
I told you mine. It's the Mr. Bus syndrome. You make an appointment to see a friend at a bus stop, and you say, I'll see you at 10 o'clock, but you forgot to tell him what day, and he was there yesterday, and you go there today, and you never see each other.
Or you say, he says 10, but he doesn't say 10 a.m. or 10 p.m.
Well,
and one person shows up
that's
at
what
10 a.m.
Jason Wright calls Schelling points, right? Where how do you agree to meet with somebody in a big city? You know, well, you say, well, I'm going to meet by that statue over there. You know,
Right. And then there's the other thing. The other thing is that the technology or the advancement of there could be thousands of planets in our neighborhood with animal life on it that we'll never even know because they're just either not
Well, we will
technological
know.
enough, or the other way around. They've long since passed us, and they said, "Screw them." You know, they're still apes over there. We're going to go our own way.
well, okay, that you just mentioned like a couple of the most
Familiar.
popular hypothesis. You know, but to me, the Fermi paradox is not. The answers aren't very interesting. We're almost certainly wrong about all of them. What the only thing interesting about the Fermi paradox is if it inspires some serious analysis and you've thought about the nature of life in the universe and our galaxy, then and how, and actually what Fermi was asking was, why aren't they here, right? Why aren't they colonizing the Earth? Not so much, you know, why don't we see them in our telescopes?
To me, that's ridiculous. To me,
why
that's
aren't we detecting them? See, that's,
because they're not there right now.
Well, Fermi was a little bit brighter than the average person, and he was actually what is actually a very insightful question. If you have civilizations everywhere, you just need one that has this colonization drive, and they'll be everywhere.
See, okay, now
in millions of years instead of billions of years, they would already be here.
Well, my bus stop idea was basically a simplistic way of putting this. Okay, let's take two stars, identical stars. They were born literally at the same time. Okay. All right, this is going to be two parts to this. All right. Now, our star, the sun, you know, it evolves over 4.5 billion years or whatever, and we come up with what we are now. But this one here, you know, slightly different circumstances happened. Maybe there's a planet that took a little longer to, you know, we're talking 1,000 years difference could mean nothing to astronomical numbers. But these two identical stars, even if they were born at the same time, may not. You know, the statistical impossibility of them developing exactly the same is ridiculously improbable. Now, then you take that and you say, now what are the probabilities of even two stars being born at the same time? It's not even likely for that to happen.
No, it happens about 20 times a year.
Basically, a simplification of that. There's the synchronicity. There's no synchronicity.
Well,
there's probably life, all kinds of life out there, but the synchronicity of
what you're talking about is a very simplified version of what goes into the thinking behind the Drake equation, but that's not really what the Fermi paradox is about.
I know the Fermi paradox to me asks the ridiculous question: why aren't they here? Why aren't we communicating? Because they're not.
That's what I
No, that of course that's a tautology. Yeah, okay, they're not. So let's say
they're not. But that doesn't mean that they were never there, or that doesn't mean that there's no life out there. It just means that they're not.
No, that's not what Fermi was asking. He was asking why isn't at least one of them colonized the galaxy? And if you look at it,
no, it's why don't we see evidence of them? And that's why don't we see evidence of them? Now, let me put this forward.
No, that wasn't what he was asking.
All right, well,
he was asking why are we not, you know?
But it's a reasonable extrapolation of Fermi. I mean, Fermi has been extrapolated, so it includes observation at a distance and any other way that would get past the great silence, as it were.
Well, but the so-called great silence, which isn't all that great, actually is very different. I mean, if you think about it, if you had a colonizer, if you had a expansionary civilization, the evidence of that would be obvious. It would be right in your face. It would be.
I would argue that the same thing would be true for a communicating civilization. If it were out there,
I don't think so.
It would be obvious, and it would be because they'd know how to make themselves obvious if they had the technology available.
Well, but why would they do that?
Well, why would they come here? You can say the same thing.
Paul,
stop.
Why are we doing it?
once again, the same logic that applies to the Fermi paradox in terms of why aren't they here. If there are a lot of civilizations, it would only take one of them to count. If there are a lot of civilizations, it would take only one communicating civilization broadcasting at high power to light up the whole universe, basically.
No, we wouldn't see them lighting up the whole universe. We would not possibly even see them at all. I mean, that's a common misconception. We at any given time, our telescopes are looking at a tiny fraction of the sky. Just and unless they can maintain this incredible broadcast, which nobody knows why they would do that, but you can conceive of.
Yeah, but all of these things you're saying can be folded right back on the Fermi paradox, and you can say, why would they come to Earth? But the whole point is we're talking a statistical argument.
Natural selection, right?
If there are a lot of civilizations, only one of them would have to colonize the galaxy, or only one of them would have to communicate. And given the time available, there's been plenty of time for multi-million-year-old super civilizations that could easily harness the power of a rotating black hole or a large star and produce a signal that could be detected across the galaxy, because we know we can detect quasars at the distance of the universe for all practical purposes. So if you have a civilization that's as powerful as a quasar, it's going to be obvious. You're going to be able to see it.
Well, but
it only takes one.
But that is not the same thing as an expansionary civilization. It's very different.
But it's parallel. All I'm saying is it only takes one. If there are many civilizations, it only takes one to colonize. It only takes one to communicate. It only takes one to do some other kind of outrageous thing.
Yeah, no, I just don't see that they're
actually. What happened was they were about to come here, and then they saw that Donald Trump became president of the United States, and they said, "Screw them."
Well, my understanding of the Fermi paradox is that he's asking why we don't have any evidence of them. If they are there and my equation shows they should be, then why aren't we seeing evidence of them? And here's my point I've been trying to make regarding seeing evidence of any other civilization. Now, what if they are there, but our processes can't see them? Okay.
I agree that was certainly, that's something we should consider.
Colorblind. You can't see green, and so green things that are there are not detected, ergo they don't exist.
Well, Jill Tarter if you ask Jill Tarter, she'll say, the sample that we've taken is so small that it's entirely plausible that there is someone there that we just haven't found. Now, I'm not talking about a galactically dominating civilization. We're talking about just just one civilization that it could be just local, but and of course the whole SETI enterprise to date has largely depended upon the notion that they would want to communicate with us. They would want us to know they're there. There's two other possibilities, broadly speaking. One that they would not want us to know, and one is that they just wouldn't care whether we knew, and which I think the second one is far more probable. And they would, so we'd have to catch them in the act, which we have never, we don't have the really capability to do that right now.
It's why I say I know that there is life out there. Whether or not they're intelligent life or not, it doesn't matter. I know that there's life everywhere in this galaxy.
You don't know that. You're positive.
I'm just saying, me personally, I just know this. But the statistical improbability,
you have faith.
Never actually finding it is literally astronomical.
You have faith then.
The chances against it are literally astronomical.
Well, no, we don't even know that. I mean, at
the same time, the statistical possibilities for there to be life everywhere is also very high.
I think as most astrobiologists will say almost certainly there's microbial life all over the place.
Right. Yeah, I'm talking about all life. Right?
We just don't know how that microbial life gets to technologically advanced life, and how often.
But logically thinking and statistically thinking, there is most likely life every freaking where. Whether or
Well-
not the civilizations is another big thing. But for us to detect it, or for us to actually see it, and especially since a civilization life form, intelligent life form, is even less likely, the chances of us
Well,
even seeing them
we
is
don't
even
even
less.
know that. I mean, right?
Again, the statistics are just insurmountable.
Well, no,
That's why it's the bus stop.
yeah,
You know?
we
I told
don't.
you about
We are
that.
missing some factors though. We don't know. I'm sympathetic to the notion that probably in the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to reach the conclusion in a rigorously scientific way that life is a property of chemistry and free energy, and it's going to happen. And but technologically advanced life is a big leap from that.
Yeah. I mean, it took us, what is it, 4.5 billion or more years, and then for the life forms on this planet to become intelligent, it took I mean, we're only, us human apes are only a few 100,000 years old.
That's right, and it may be that last jump from being clever with banging rocks together to having radio telescopes is a jump that's hard to do. We don't know,
right?
We just don't know.
And astronomically speaking, that's a short period of time. In our lifetimes, of course, it's a long time.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, let's say it's 1 million years, just for round numbers. But doesn't matter how long it takes. The question is how likely is it, and we just don't have any idea. N equals 1 is not a good statistical argument. So now, if we do find another technological civilization in our galaxy, that totally changes the odds. But we have to then figure out, okay, what is it that changed in the Drake equation?
Well, see, another thing is that intelligent life doesn't necessarily mean technologically advanced enough to start building radio telescopes.
Yeah, I mean the Greeks were first smart, but they didn't have radio telescopes, right?
Believe it or not, there are still tribes on this planet. There's like one left somewhere in, is it Brazil? Is it Australia? I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's Brazil.
Arkansas, I think.
Or Venezuela.
I mean, these are human beings, and they're just as smart as the average bear, but they just never bothered to change. They didn't find they just lived their lives year after decade after century, and basically stayed almost the same. Not that they don't communicate with people around them, but they just
real hardcore Luddites.
Well, now they have AK-47s though, so. But
I mean, there could be planets out there with intelligent life that never bothered to build technology that is able to communicate or whatever.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. Or it might be that they're just physically constrained. They might be marine life,
marine life, dinosaurs. Who the hell knows? I mean,
it might be that their planet is not conducive.
I know this is an unscientific thing for me to say, but I'm damn sure that there's life out there of all kinds.
Well, yeah, you're getting
just a matter of, but the statistical improbabilities of there to be intelligent life that had created civilization and technology that decided to communicate with us, we
don't know what those probabilities are.
And if there's
anybody
like that in this galaxy, they're on the other side of the galaxy and they couldn't do it anyway.
Well, no, we don't know that they could be next door. We just don't know. And that to me is very exciting that we don't know. To me, it's a thing. Oh, well, something that's totally wide open. Let's see if it can constrain it somehow. And one way you constrain it is by going to places like Enceladus or Titan and seeing, did life evolve there? And was it a second Genesis? And then that fills in one of the blanks, not all of them.
Well, you know me, I'm big on space exploration.
Yeah, and it may take hundreds of years, thousands of years before we solve the question. Is it possible that technological civilization arises frequently or infrequently or never or just one? Well, not never, once, at least just once. we don't know the answer to that question either.
Right.
And these are all questions that are, in my view, wide open. And we see a generation of young scientists now who are really intrigued by these questions.
Sure. I mean, there was actually
and they're no longer sacrificing their careers by saying, "I'd like to know if there's life on other planets or not."
Yeah. Yeah, which to me was a stupidity of a few hundred years ago.
Well, it took Carl Sagan to come on, and he coined the term exobiology, right? Which never really caught on, but he said, "Look, let's take this seriously." And a whole lot of his same generation of scientists said, "No, let's not take this seriously."
Yeah, that's what I call stupid scientists.
Well, they weren't stupid at all. They were just framing things in a different way.
I know, but that's what I call those people stupid scientists. Because if they're so smart and they're so scientific and they can't see past their own bias that, oh yeah, we're the only ones,
Well, look, Patrick, we all have biases.
But there are much more sophisticated ways to frame this. If you turn to Thomas Kuhn's model of this, these are the people who want to do normal science. They want to focus on problem solving and building the model. So the physicists who are into this, they stick with the standard model. They try to make a little bit of contribution. They add a little bit here, they add a little bit there, but they don't introduce any big revisions. And the people who are working on, radically different things like modified Newtonian dynamics or quantized inertia or all the other marginal forms of physics, they want to revolutionize. They don't want to use the standard model. They want to approach it in a very different way.
Yeah, no, I should point out that almost all of them are doomed to fail.
The thing is, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm a science enthusiast, right? So I'm an average guy. I'm slightly above IQ level than normal, than average, but to me, it's a stupidity. You become this super genius scientist, and you avoid the basic logic. I mean,
no, Pat, Nick's right. I mean, nearly to become a good scientist, you have to be highly trained scientist. And,
I know, but
you have to have a paradigm, and the paradigm says we're only sticking to natural processes that are.
I'm talking about the scientists who laughed at the Carl Sagans in the world. They
didn't laugh at him. They just didn't like the fact that bringing biology into what
these are supposed to be people with open minds. They close their mind to the possibilities. Wait a minute, let me finish. There's a logical possibility. There's a logic behind the whole thing. And not even being a scientist, I can see the logic of not making the assumption that there is, like I like to joke about, but at least saying, there's gotta be. Let's find out why we're not finding it. There's a path to finding the answers. But these so-called scientists who are supposed to be such geniuses, some of them literally say, get out of here with your spaceman shit.
I know people who are absolutely brilliant within their subject matter. I mean, in really narrow specialities like mathematical logic, but they don't know squat when they get out. So you can be completely brilliant in that, but that doesn't mean you're going to be open-minded to anybody's theory. And if you want to know about open-mindedness, talk to somebody doing physics about these other marginal theories, and they just are usually completely dismissive of them, even if these people do have a point to make. And you can immediately assess the rationality of the person you're talking to if they have a marginal physical theory or a marginal cosmological theory. Ask them, what are the problems with your theory? And if they can state right off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you're dealing with a rational problem. They know they've got a theory. They know other people have theories. They know that there's some evidence for theirs and there's some evidence against theirs, and they have to balance that out. And somebody says, "Oh no, my theory explains everything, and I don't even have to take account. There are no problems."
I'm not talking about that kind of stupidity. I'm talking about the dismissal of a real possibility.
No, but it's rational to dismiss things if you're focused on developing your particular area of science or expertise. You don't want to be bothered by that other stuff. You don't want an open mind. You want to get the biggest grant you can possibly get for your institution, so you can focus on building the biggest instrument you can build.
Well,
and
I'm a
so
little
and then you can compare, and you can say my instrument is bigger than your instrument, and I'm going to prove it.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem.
But we do get a lot of surprises out of those big instruments, right?
I'm a little old for this, but that's why I coined the phrase science enthusiast. Because
the thing is, Patrick, the amount of surprise that we can tolerate is kind of constrained, but we can have a certain amount of surprise, and then we can evolve towards more advanced concept. And if you look at the history of it over time, we have done that.
It's the deniers that it's why.
I mean, look, there are some really bizarre.
I have a problem with. Like,
there are some things that 100 years ago would have been considered.
We were the center of the universe, and if you said anything different, the Catholic Church would slap you upside your head.
Yeah, but let's look 100 years back. If you had gone back and told people about black holes, neutron stars, even white dwarfs would have been
plate tectonics,
anything. Much of what is considered just normal everyday stuff in today's physics and science. If you said, we understand a lot, we know how to modify inheritance within the organism and create a new organism, they would have said, no, that's not possible.
You're talking.
In fact, you had someone how to do brain. If you had to say we know how to do brain surgery. Back in 1900, they would have said, "No, you can't do that. That's not humane."
Stairs. Back then we didn't have all that, but we did have somebody who said, "I don't think that the sun is orbiting us. I think that we are orbiting the sun." And basically, he was going to be, he was scoffed at. He was, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
About Copernicus?
One step on the staircase. I'm not talking about jumping an entire staircase. I'm talking about simply taking the next logical.
Yeah, but you got to take the next step and not 5 steps ahead. That's the problem. I mean,
I think our best leaps in knowledge are made by theoretical physicists. And somebody like Einstein, for example, he really moved the ball forward. I think theoretical physicists are able to just open their mind and think about a lot of amazing things and then work it out in formula and mathematics and everything. I think they make big contributions, but
they do. But I think the low-hanging fruit there is largely gone.
What?
But
the low-hanging fruit. I mean, Einstein plucked it. There was people like Lorentz had created this big juicy apple that was Einstein just had to reach up and grab it, really, and he did. He was the first one to have these amazing insights, but it was time to do that. It was time to reach that point. I mean, people like Maxwell have come before him and done the hard work.
Yeah, if Einstein hadn't done it, Hilbert would have done it within a decade.
Well, Hilbert already actually had a theory that was pretty similar, but didn't quite nail it.
Others would have worked out the field equations of gravitation. But what I find fascinating about Einstein is, yes, his thought was absolutely radical. It was so radical it was difficult to get accepted in his day. But even though his thought was radical, he presented it in as moderate a way as you could possibly imagine. So that you've got this theory that's got all kinds of really outlandish implications in it. And he didn't even talk about black holes. He rejected an expanding universe, I think, until like 1932 or maybe a little before that.
Oh, no, 20. Well, yeah, the early 30s.
But under the influence of Lemaitre mostly, and of course Hubble's findings. But he could have come out early in 1905 and the first decade of the 20th century and talked about all this outlandish stuff, and probably nobody would have even.
Well, in 1905 he didn't have the general theory developed.
But he had special theories.
Einstein was the first science.
What I'm saying is he could have been much more radical. He could have talked about black holes. He could have talked about an expanding universe. He could have, but he presented his radical theory in a very. So he predicted, the time dilation and the absence of simultaneity, or the inability to measure simultaneity.
The relativity of simultaneity. It's not absent. It's just relative.
Okay, the relativity of simultaneity and the deflection of of starlight by gravitation because of the curvature of space. That was something that could be definitely measured. It was measured in 1919, and it was one of the great, crucial experiments of the day, and
I
he was
think theorists do a better job of advancing big ideas, mathematical theorists and theoretical physics and stuff, which is different than a scientist like Pasteur, who is just working on a very small, like you were talking about, Nick, a very small little niche of some science problem. And so that's all he's spending his time and energy on, is this tiny little bacteria or whatever. But the theorists have big ideas that move big chunks of thinking in all sorts of disciplines.
But all these big ideas seem to have a point where they come to fruition, where they just seem almost like a lot of people would have come up with the same idea if you waited long enough. Like Newton invented calculus almost at the same time as Leibniz did.
And Wallace and Darwin came up with natural selection.
Wallace and Darwin recognized Wallace's that he had come up with natural selection as well. And
the time is right for these.
But there was a geologist that came before them, and the work that came before them that laid the groundwork for that. Oh, the Earth is much older than 6,000 years old.
Hutton and Lyell, obviously.
Yeah, Lyell really was the guy who blew away of the old paradigm.
Well, Hutton was important, but he wasn't a good writer like Lyell was.
Hutton was largely rejected in his own time, but he was an influence on Lyell. And
Wegener was largely invited into Wegener, who's the first guy to talk about continental drift in the modern times, I should say, in the 20th century. He was ridiculed and died without any confirmation of his ideas, and it wasn't until because of the Cold War, the submarines mapped the seafloor across the entire planet, and they discovered the mid-Atlantic range, and then they started realizing, oh, the ocean's not just a big basin that's full of mud at the bottom; it's got topography.
Yeah, well, Hutton delivered his results at Edinburgh in the late 18th century, which is the most enlightened place on the planet at the time, and he was kind of indifferent response, but.
Right, but
the young Lyell picked up on that and built it into.
Have you tried to read Hutton's major work? It's dull. It's really dull. It's hard to get through.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's true. That's true of the Principia as well.
Well, there are parts of the Principia that are pretty fun.
I'm checking out, guys. So
good night, Marcia.
Shame, because I just discovered
one last little thing I want to mention. One of the biggest problems in science today, I'd say, is where in anthropologists and that ilk, where they got very married to an idea and would stubbornly refuse to look at new evidence, and they would fight it until there was so much new evidence that they couldn't argue their erroneous point anymore. I think that's an example that Patrick is probably thinking of too, where scientists get to a point and they adhere to this particular idea that they brought forward, and they are absolutely married to it. Don't bother them with the facts. That exists in academia and in science, unfortunately.
And I heard that this time because I just discovered that I can the toolbox works now, and I turned your volume up, so I heard you this time.
Okay, well, just time for me to say good night, gentlemen.
Good night, Marcia. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my knowledge of Hutton is largely based upon the book that I read about his biography, but he presented his result. He went all over Scotland and studied the rocks. He was actually a farmer. Before that, he'd been a physician, but of course, medicine in the 18th century was pretty much a joke. But he stopped that and been a farmer, and then he noticed that while he was walking around his farm, he saw these layers of rocks and so forth, became fascinated with that, and then sailed all around the coast of Scotland and saw these different exposures and actually put together a case that the Earth was, he thought it was about 10 million years old, which is at that point was way, way, way longer than the biblical 6,000 years, right?
Yeah, at least
So
he was pushing forward the idea that it's a lot older than you think it is.
yeah, but Lyell's the one actually dug in and said, okay, went all over the world and said, here's how the layers come together. Really started stratigraphy and as a serious science and big influence on Darwin. Big influence.
You know, it's the fact that every scientist we're talking about, including what you just mentioned, these people were able to sail the world or travel, or they had this drive. So Einstein, for example, the experiment with the solar eclipse experiment.
Well, that was Eddington that did the
It was
equipment.
a war breaking
experiment.
out, and he was still able to convince one colleague to travel with
Well,
him. And
Eddington couldn't do that till after the war was over.
Yeah, they had to wait till after the war. Many people thought it was a peacemaking gesture that Eddington, an English scientist, would make this journey to Africa to be able to observe the eclipse that could confirm the work of
well, there was one
a
chance
scientist.
yes, and then a second chance he was able to get. He had to travel.
Yeah. The first time didn't work out.
Right. Anyway, the point of the matter is that the stamina, the stick-to-itism of wanting to do this experiment and you know, surmounting impossible odds to travel during these, you know, trying times and stuff like that, and he managed to do it, and it turned out that he was right. I mean, and you could say that about a lot of famous scientists, you know, including as far back as Copernicus, you know, and Galileo, for example, the insurmountable Catholic bigotry church, you know, putting him in house arrest and things like that, and is still sticking to his that sort of thing. You know, these people stuck to their guns even though there was insurmountable, you know, things stopping them. They did it anyway. So
No.
it's a shame that the world works like that. It's a shame that these insurmountables coming from some of the people.
But a lot of the progress that was made in spite of all that, and a lot of times the various institutions that want to control dogma aren't even aware of it until it's too late for them.
Right. I mean, like, for example, I think one of the reasons why I'm not a scientist is because of those insurmountable, you know.
No, it's not insurmountable anymore. I mean, hell, you can publish anything on archive.
Yeah, but you know, take it from somebody who's a complete outsider. You can if your work is not part of a community of people who are interested in what you're doing, anything you put out there is just going to be ignored. Yes, they are. You can cite cases of people who are otherwise unknown who suddenly got their idea, their paper read, and people paid attention to it. But it's quite rare. People tend to be part of communities, and they're interested in what the other people in their community are doing.
Yeah, I agree. You have to at least get a toehold in the community, and it doesn't mean you have to really be an insider or a power player in those communities. Just have to have enough insight into
like you said, you have to get a toehold.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of really great thinkers have not been, you know, the movers and shakers in their communities.
That's right. The movers and shakers become departmental heads and sometimes presidents of universities, but they're not necessarily the best researchers.
Yeah, and they're not really, you know, they're not really happy that like Oppenheimer was actually quite a good physicist before he became an administrator, but he I'm not sure.
He's a chess player too.
Who does?
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Because I had the game between Oppenheimer and
yeah.
Einstein.
Well, Oppenheimer was
Oppenheimer doesn't play very well.
A very sophisticated physicist for his day, but he, you know, somebody decided he should be running projects instead of doing physics.
But he was actually quite good at running the Manhattan Project.
Yeah,
and from what little I know about the history of it, to go back to what Patrick was saying earlier about the obstacles that scientists have had to overcome. I'd like to mention that I recently, last summer, read the book The Invention of Nature, which is about Alexander von Humboldt, which is absolutely a gripping account of Alexander von Humboldt's travels in South America. And what he did is it just basically blew my mind. When you think of the all those mountains that he climbed with 19th century gear, then he lived through it all and lived to a ripe old age and got back to Germany again. It's an amazing story.
Yeah. Again, that's why I'm a science enthusiast and not a scientist, because I'd be dead before I started the first mountain.
Well, you don't have to climb a mountain to be a scientist. You can.
I'm just metaphorically speaking.
There's all kinds of stuff.
There's all kinds of mountains, you know, not just physical ones.
Well, you know, but these days we have citizen science. You can jump on the Galaxy Zoo or Cosmo Quest and do science.
I did that for a little while.
It's actually pretty fun. Planet Hunters, one of my favorites.
Yeah, there was a problem with the Cosmo Quest. What's her name?
Pamela Gay.
Pamela Gay. I actually signed up for it, and something happened. I don't know, but I was in the middle of changing computers. Somewhere along the line, my password was lost. I don't know. I couldn't sign back in again. It was years past now, but I couldn't get back in it.
Yeah, you can fix that.
I know. I'm sure I can, but I was
go into Galaxy Zoo and have some fun. You know.
Yeah, I did that. I told you I've done it.
Yeah.
But I did get barred somehow.
Adam recommend what is it? The Serengeti.
I did some of the galaxy type, survey, and I did some of the planet hunting first. And way back when I did SETI, the SETI thing. You know, the screen
SETI at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that too. That's not quite as involving. You just let your screensaver run.
Yeah, kind of boring.
But
got to the point where I actually had another computer running it, and I but that was an old computer.
The reality is anyone can get involved in science who wants to.
But I'm talking about like people like Einstein, people like Newton, people like.
Well, no, that requires a lot of talent. Well,
not only takes brains, but it takes. You might even call it physical. I mean, the ability to travel for one thing.
Well, Einstein didn't travel. He went from Switzerland to
well, I could just about get out of New Jersey. Forget about it.
Yeah, well, and he wouldn't have come to this country except that he was Jewish and was kind of worried about his prospects in Central Europe. So he wisely came to New Jersey. And didn't really leave New Jersey after that, by the way, Patrick. But the thing is that you can stay right in the same house and do fantastic science.
Yeah, the citizen science stuff was good. Like I said, I had a problem a few years ago with the Cosmo Quest getting back in, and I gave up on it. But I did do some of the stuff. I did do some of the Galaxy. What's the word I'm looking for? Sorting.
Galaxy Zoo.
Yeah, the Galaxy Zoo, where you sort the type of galaxy, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's fun.
That was a little.
And if you get bored of that, you can move on to lots of other projects that they have.
Yeah. Now they got they're doing the whole thing is now it's Boeing, the software.
Boeing just does the SETI at home stuff. Well, there's or the full.
They're doing cancer research.
The other kind of like use my extra CPU cycles for something else, sort of. But that's not what I mean by citizen science. I think Cosmo Quest is more like citizen science.
Yeah.
Although I mean, SETI at home is, no one should be discouraged from doing that. That's fine. But
not exactly a science, but it was sort of. I mean,
yeah,
it goes to the Fermi question and everything. Why can't we detect them? And we're still searching for them. We are still searching, but it got to the point where we're never going to find a signal. The WOW signal was the inspiration to be part of it.
There have been lots of signals like the WOW signal. The problem is that they don't repeat. And as far as we haven't really maintained surveillance, but the WOW signal didn't seem to repeat it at all.
Didn't they finally come up to the conclusion that the WOW signal was a spurious military signal that they didn't admit to or something? No.
The problem is that it was in the radio astronomy bands, which people aren't supposed to be transmitting in. It was right near that.
I don't know if I'm convinced that Paul Carr tells me no, and I'm not convinced. I still think it might have been what they suggested, and it was only a suggestion. I'm not saying
who's they. Who suggested?
I don't remember.
Yeah, that's
But
what. Yeah,
it
they
was
didn't.
suggested by
They didn't
by-
suggest that.
by reputable people that
Who can't name?
it might have been
Well,
a signal that was, you know, something that was going on in the military, and it might have been one of
This
those.
was 1977.
Yes.
It was.
It was the year I graduated high school, which
I know what frequencies the military uses, and that wasn't one of them.
well, it doesn't matter that you know what they use. It's a matter of what were they doing that you didn't know about. You know, I mean, it could be.
No, I said I know what they use.
Yeah, you know what they use. All right, you know. I know what
they don't use those
I know what
frequencies.
time it is. That doesn't mean you know.
No, they don't use those frequencies. They don't.
Okay.
And
I've never wandered off on a CB radio on a channel that wasn't supposed to be used either, right?
Well, CB radio is a very narrow band.
I'm just you're not getting it. You're not getting it.
Yeah, I do get it, and it's wrong.
Okay. All right.
I know a lot about this sort of thing. It's not that's not an explanation.
No, I mean, it could have been a wise ass, smart kid, you know, flying his plane and
going
off on a, you know.
No.
All right, I'm just being stupid about it, but you're not understanding where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I do understand. It's wrong.
Okay.
There's a lot more to the WOW signal than I think
let's put it this way. The WOW signal was never concluded to be from outside of the planet Earth system.
Yes, it
was.
was
Concluded that it came from outside.
Yeah, if we have.
Well, that's not what I heard.
Well, it's just Patrick. There are two horns on the big ear.
Okay, so where did it come from then? You tell me.
The two horns cancel each other out. So if you have RFI coming in to both horns, you get nothing. So it has to be and it has to be a signal that's coming in from a very specific direction. And this was they had a 10 kilohertz bandwidth on each of the channels. It never varied outside that channel in the 72 seconds. That's not a satellite. That's not an airplane. That's not somebody walking around with a radio at an unauthorized frequency.
So what direction did it come from?
It came from, one of two directions. And I believe it's constellation Sagittarius, but it's not, we don't know what it was. I'm not saying we know what it was.
No, I know.
I'm not saying it was aliens.
You telling me that
I'm saying that it's not explained.
Okay, so as long as you're telling me that it you know, from what I heard, it came from within our system.
No, that is totally not correct.
Let me finish. You're saying no, I'm wrong. It definitely came from somewhere out, like somewhere.
Well, no, I'm saying no. I didn't say that. I said there's no evidence that it came from close to the Earth.
Okay, but is there evidence that it came from? You said Sagittarius.
Well, yes, there is.
That's what I was saying, but you didn't let me finish.
But because an object, but as a signal that's fixed on the celestial sphere, will look exactly like that.
Right. So that's why I heard that, like, it might have come from a reflection or something.
Nope.
You know. All right. But you're telling me two different things. You're telling me opposite.
The big ear.
You know, in my brain, you've become known as the naysayer.
No, I'm just saying
what I say,
you have to look at the facts
disagree with me.
and the details of the system that detected it.
Okay, so you're telling me that you have evidence that it came from outside our system, and you're saying, no, I didn't say that.
No, I'm saying we have no evidence that it didn't, which is different.
Okay.
That there's no evidence that it was a known source.
Okay.
Okay.
But is there any evidence at all that it came from a specific direction?
There are two possible directions that are quite close to each other. Those are well established and they're known.
And they are from the area of constellation?
I don't on top of my head, but I can look them up for you.
All right.
There's a strong.
I'll take your word for it now. But I got to tell you, Paul, this is the pub, so I'm going to tell you flat out that you have a habit of knocking me everything I say down. Even though it's true.
Well, because what you said was uninformed.
You're doing it now.
It was uninformed.
Even though everything I say is not nearly as articulate as our friend Nick over here, because I find him to be the most articulate person.
Patrick, if you want to if you want to criticize something, you need to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm just a general citizen, and all I could do is go through the stuff that I hear and see on the general availability of the what I consider good news, that is reputable news, and what I heard way back when, in the 70s and early 80s. Actually, it was the early 80s that when I was doing a little bit more research on it, because I was going to be part of the SETI project and all that shit. And I heard that it was likely, not necessarily true, but it looked more likely that it was some tomfoolery that was going on here.
Well, first of all, every time you hear the word likely, that should peg your skepticism meter. People rarely know what they mean by likely. They just mean my bias is X.
Okay, I use the
rather
word,
than
I don't know if
say
they use
likely.
the word likely. We're talking about a couple of dozen years ago, and it's been a long time since I've actually saw this news and figured.
So 93.
Okay.
That was 24 years ago.
Okay, I see.
Which would have been
I'm 58 years old now. My memory isn't exactly up to par.
Well, the thing is, this
Actually,
stuff's
it
all
isn't up to
written
par.
down. It's all documented.
It's not exactly up to par, actually.
Well, okay.
It seems like you knocked down everything I said.
We went through this whole thing a few months ago. I don't want to go through it again, but
the Antonio Paris comment thing.
Yeah, which let's just suffice it to say the astronomical community justifiably shot that down with in flames.
I'm not sure what that is.
Shot down in flames.
I don't know.
I mean, it wasn't me. I was quiet about it because Antonio's a friend of mine, but I let him have his say. He and I talked about it privately, and then he put it out there, and people like Chris Lintott, real astronomers, just blew it out of the sky.
I don't know what you're talking about.
A few months ago, it was proposed that the WOW signal was the result of a comet, and Antonio Paris was the one who was associated with this idea, and they mounted a crowdfunding campaign to get enough money to try to reproduce some of the conditions and see if they could get some kind of data to either falsify or confirm this idea.
I don't believe it was from a comet, but
well, I mean, it turns out he made mistakes on the ephemeris of the comet.
That goes against my logic, even though I'm just a science enthusiast and not a science. That automatically went against my sense of logic. To me,
yeah, but there were a number of problems, and which people like Chris pointed out, and that's you won't hear about that that issue again. I don't really want to beat it to death. It's a dead horse. The
thing is that also the WOW signal was apparently actually pretty strong.
It was very strong. It was at least 50 Janskys, if not.
I don't know what that word is, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, Jansky is a measurement of flux density for any kind of electromagnetic signal, and the most sensitive telescopes in the world can detect millijanskys. Thousands of a Jansky. Now, at the time of the Big Air was an operation. It could easily detect like a Jansky.
Well, that's what I'm saying. In other words,
one Jansky. So it was like 50. It was 50 or maybe more than 100, more than 50 times that.
Yeah. So the signal strength was such that it was hard to. How could I say? Imagine? I don't know if I want to use that word.
No, it was physically realizable. It just wasn't. It wasn't like a little weak signal that just barely pulled out of the noise. It was a big, strong signal.
That's what I'm saying. In other words, the idea that it was so strong was already the initial suggestion because of its strength. The initial suggestion.
Well, that's why Jerry Amon wrote "wow" next to it. It was a strong signal. And it looked
that was the first suggestion.
It looked just like the signal they were looking for.
That's what I'm saying. That's what was the first suggestion, that it was from here. That's why, because it was so
From
short.
here? No, it's actually, you could get a much stronger signal. It You have to understand the big ear that was built in Ohio, which no longer exists, by the way, was demolished quite a few years ago, was designed to catalog a chunk of the sky, the radio sources in a chunk of, and it did that very successfully. And they did it for like about 10 years, and they pretty much had their catalog done.
I mean,
And then they decided to use it for SETI because they had done what they set out to do with the telescope. And it was actually quite a marvelous thing. They did it with a lot of hard work and very little money, and a lot of donations, and not a whole, basically no government funds.
Forget about how much work was, but look, I know a little bit, not a lot. I know a tiny bit about signal propagation and reflectiveness and things like this. I mean, not that this has anything to do with the WOW signal, but just as a silly example, okay? I was working as a teenager in some electronics store on a highway, on the most dangerous highway in New Jersey at one time, and a huge thunderstorm was coming over, and suddenly I was picking up an FM radio station from like halfway around the world for about 5 seconds. There was a signal. This is what I mean. I mean, signals can get reflected and changed, and this is what I'm saying. It could have been almost anything. I don't think there's any way they're gonna ever figure out what the WOW signal was. But I'm thoroughly convinced, or I'm thoroughly not convinced, that it was from outside, because of the strange things that can happen with electromagnetic radiation.
Well, the FM radio is like much longer wavelengths.
Forget about the fact that it was FM radio. I'm just giving you.
No, I mean, but no, you can't forget about that. The fact is, the phenomenology is very different at much shorter wavelengths.
Okay, all right. I give up on you, Paul.
Don't give up.
I give up. In fact, I'm going to go get some ice to put in my wine. I'll be right back.
Ice in your wine? Oh, no, hold on.
Okay. I dilute it.
Now, I don't have much in religious belief, but that is wrong.
Well,
that is sinful.
I self-dilute because I still drink too much.
Okay. Well, actually, I think it's almost midnight, so I think we're going to, here on the East Coast of the United States, so I think we're going to call an end to the pub. And
okay.
I have to do, I think I have to do something like a college visit tomorrow. Gosh, hard to believe I have a kid who's about to go to college.
So can I ask you a question about something that came up when we were doing the last Unseen podcast?
Yeah.
You mentioned you had just been to a guidance counselor or something like that as part of this college placement thing, or getting advice for your child. Did the guidance counselor you spoke with your child present, did they know you're a rocket scientist?
Actually, my child wasn't there, but no. Well, this is the DC era. Everybody's got. Most people have advanced degrees and do sophisticated things. I think she did know I was working at NASA, but she didn't. I don't think that. I think I bounced right off of her because, probably a lot of the parents she deals with are MDs or PhDs, and
right. Okay.
This is Montgomery County, Maryland. This isn't.
Well, I've never been to Montgomery County, Maryland, so I don't know what it's like.
Well, it's one of the richest counties in the world, in the United States, and it's also has a very high proportion of people with
degrees,
with college degrees. Yeah, there's also a lot of immigrants, which makes it an interesting place. Recent immigrants from all over the world, and many of them do not have an advanced education, but have tremendous energy and work ethic, and want their kids to succeed. So we see that a lot too. a lot of African immigrants, interestingly, people from Africa. And these African immigrants are a lot like the Vietnamese immigrants of the 70s. They own convenience stores, and they want their kids to go to medical school or whatever.
Are they Somalis? Do you know where they're coming from?
A lot of different countries in Africa, and I mean, Africa has a big population and growing population, and so some of them are going to come here, and so it's. But we also have a lot of Hispanics, of course, many of whom are recently arrived, and some who've been here, some who've been here for generations, others not. But so it's a complex place, but the educational, we have something like, I think out of the top 100 high schools in the country, we have something like 5 of them. So, I mean, it depends on how you rank the high schools, of course, but, and our neighboring county in Virginia, in Fairfax County, has something like 7 or 8 of them.
I've actually heard the name of Fairfax County. It's well known for that.
Yeah. People move to Fairfax County just so their kids can go to high school there.
Right. I understand that.
It's that good. And Montgomery's only just like a step behind. And people leave Baltimore. They come out of Baltimore and move to Howard or Montgomery County just so their kids can go to decent high school. And without having to pay $30,000, $40,000 a year tuition for private school. Private high schools can actually be as much as almost as much as colleges. So,
or more.
Yeah, I was looking at, I looked at recently, George Washington University is about $50,000 a year tuition. A good high school will be about $40,000 a year, so 35 to 40. So, yeah, it's we're in-state tuition for a good public university is probably about $15,000. So, give you some calibration on that. Yeah, it's my daughter fortunately does not have that competitive drive. She just wants to do well. She just needs to do better. But there's a lot of, it's really a very competitive area, very competitive kids.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's only so many places at MIT, you know. So or you know, name your top school, Johns Hopkins, Stanford. So to get into those places, you gotta you have to really put out. It's not easy, and but you know, not every parent really wants that for their kids. They don't necessarily have to go to an elite school, and we're like that. We just, you know, we're more like, what would make my kid happy? What would my kid be fascinated with? What would my kid find rewarding and exciting, and not, you know, oh, my kid's at Princeton, you know, something to brag about. Don't need that.
Yeah. No, not the Tiger Mom sort of phenomenon.
No, I mean, and you know, and it's true that I've known a lot of people who've been super successful at what they wanted to do, who did not go to elite schools.
Yeah, you end up, you got the right idea. That you end up with much better, much happier kids, much happier people when they're pursuing, like you said, you know, what they're
yeah. I know people who are very happy and successful who didn't go to college at all.
And then there's those or those elite school people who are just a bunch of freaking snobs.
No, that's not true.
There are some
people. A lot of people at elite schools are just super talented and super hardworking, and they deserve credit for that.
Yeah, I know. I said some. I didn't say a lot.
I mean, if I could go back in time, and you know, I probably would have gone to MIT. if I could have controlled all the variables, that would have led me there. And MIT is one of the elite schools, but it's also a really, really good school.
Happiness is a major part of education.
Yeah.
If you're not happy in the school or whatever you're doing,
Well, you're going to be unhappy. If you're not unhappy some of the time, then you're probably not challenged enough.
The happier you are, the better you are.
And because if you're trudging through the snow at 20 degrees below zero in MIT, and to get to a 7 a.m. class, you're probably not going to be happy, but you're good. That's part of the suffering you have to go through to get.
You're going to wish you'd gone to a medical school in the Caribbean.
Yeah, that sounds a little more pleasant, but
no, but you got the right idea though. You're thinking about your kids' happiness, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, that I am, and she's a good student, and if she really wants to go to a top, I don't know if she's really quite like Ivy League material, but if she wants to go to a really good school, she can, and she's got the right work ethic and the right attitude to do that. But you have to have all that. You have to have it all come together. And talent, and let's face it. And when I used to live in Princeton, and there were a lot of really bright, talented young people there, and I applaud how much effort they made and how well they did. And it's not, so they didn't have a very good football team, sure, but they had a lot of smart kids, and a lot of them were there because they were just really, really extraterrestrially bright, and that's fine. And
extraterrestrial bright, extraterrestrial.
Well, when I say extraterrestrial, I mean so smart that you just can't figure how anybody could be that smart. And yeah, they have, and that's just Princeton. There's lots of other schools that are on that level. Stanford, Caltech. So it's going through this for my daughters, making me go back to my own. Makes me go back to 1975 when I was thinking about this sort of thing for myself, and trying to be realistic about what I could do. So it's important to, I think it's important for parents to balance your kid's happiness with kind of pushing your kid a little bit to take on a challenge. You don't want to send them just to party school. You want to,
yeah, well,
but you don't want them to apply to a bunch of schools they have no chance to get into and then be heartbroken. So, that's, or that you can't possibly afford, at Johns Hopkins is great, but let's face it, very few kids get into Johns Hopkins. It's a small undergraduate program. They take about, I think, 600 or 700 undergraduates a year. It's a 30-minute drive from here, but let's face it, we're probably not going to do that.
Right. Well, they're selling exclusivity.
But I mean, also, you have to be.
Yeah, you have to be good. I understand that, but they're selling exclusivity. That's the Peter Thiel video segment that I recommended in the last Unseen podcast. He talks about how if education is this wonderful product, the best thing you could do would be possibly to increase it. So imagine going to Harvard and say, we're going to triple the size of our population. Everybody would hate you for that, because what they're selling is elite degrees that will get your foot in the door into elite institutions.
Well, so I think he's wrong about that. I think, at least especially, you can't scale that up that easily.
No, but just as a thought experiment, you can scale it up. Say, say under ideal conditions, you had all the staff waiting in the wings. It's all ready to go. All you got to do is press the button, and you go to 10 times larger university producing 10 times as many great, wonderful, talented people. Response to that be? Would people welcome it, or would they be angry about it?
I don't think they'd be angry. I think that he's mistaken about that.
Okay, well, that would, then you disagree with him, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they'd be baffled about how you pulled that off, because it's not practical to do.
Right. Well, that's the black box of the thought experiment.
I mean, you could build another university in flyover country somewhere that was a clone of Harvard. Even if that was possible, which it isn't, with 50,000 students, that would be great if you could pull that off. But A, you're not going to find 50,000 students of that caliber, and B, who aren't already at Johns Hopkins or Caltech or whatever, and B, nobody would get angry about that. It's just not that easy to do. Now, there are some really great behemoth type universities.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I would like to see it performed. If it were possible, I would like to see it performed as a social experiment. It can't be done. This is one of those experiments.
Well, I think it will be done. It's probably done in China right now. We just don't know about it.
Yeah, but it would never.
Or India.
The whole point of prestige schools is that they have a name and a reputation. So it would have to be something that's already established, like Oxford or Cambridge or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, but you can. Well, Stanford was that sort of thing, right? Stanford came out of nowhere. Somebody said, "Here's a ton of money, build a university," and they did. Right. They built the elite university, which, if you want to be one of the hyper-competitive Silicon Valley types, you go to Stanford.
You drop out of Stanford,
or you go to Stanford 2 years and drop out, but and then you become a billionaire. But that kind of thing is. It's there. It's possible.
It's hit or miss. It's hit or miss. If you had $1 billion, you could try to do that, and you might be successful, or you might be unsuccessful.
I think it would cost more than $1 billion. But
okay, if you had $10 billion,
you look at the endowment of Harvard. This looks like $40 billion, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Which they largely mismanaged. But the endowment of Princeton is probably on about the same scale, or Yale. They have a ton of money.
Yes, they do.
And because they have very, very wealthy alumni who give them money every year. And they have accumulated over hundreds of years. And they have, being in those schools is, coming out with, say, a degree from Harvard is, yes, that is like having a gold star on your resume. But it's not the be all and end all.
No, it's not. That's just like Patrick was talking about earlier about people being happy. That counts for something too.
Well, if you went to,
agrees with me.
If you look at people that are successful, not all of them went to elite schools.
Well, I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm only saying it would be an interesting social experiment because Peter Thiel says it would make people mad to expand elite universities. You say it wouldn't make people mad. I would be interested. I really, honestly, I wouldn't know, and I would want to run the numbers.
Well, Peter Thiel could maybe afford to do that experiment.
Yes, well, he could afford to do something similar to it.
But if you look at some place like MIT, you can't just go 10x. You
can't. That's why I said it's an impossible experiment to do. But nevertheless, I would like to do it. I have an interest in impossible thought experiments.
Yeah. Well, let's say you could take Oxford and make it 10 times Oxford. Would somebody get mad about that? I don't think so. I mean, because hell, there's enough Chinese and Indian students that you could
fill it up,
who are elite intellectually. Brilliant. It could go there and fill it up.
But that would change the character of the institution. It's already
not that much. They already have a lot of them.
I know. England has a lot of people going to school there from all over.
Well, here in the U.S. we have a lot of immigrant students, and because we draw the best and brightest from all those countries.
Well, yeah, having a U.S. university degree is desired all over the world, and wealthy parents in every country in the world want their kids to go to
but a
school
lot
in
of
the
them
U.S.
stay here. A lot of them stay here.
Yes, many of them stay here,
They get their PhDs here, and they stay here,
and they stay because
and they end up becoming our university teachers.
Where else could you do equal post PhD work other than the U.S.? I mean, the other countries just don't have the facilities other than Western Europe.
Well, they do. They're developing them, but I mean,
they're developing them, but they're not nearly well as developed as they are in Western Europe and North America.
Yeah.
I mean, Western Europe and North America are so far ahead in upper division research. The world is not going to be catching up anytime soon.
Yeah, but the rest of the world provides a massive talent pool that everybody else draws from.
Yes, they do.
And you know, India alone is
almost 1 billion people, and China is 1.3 billion. Yes,
they can't win a soccer game, but damn, they got some smart people.
And you go to, I know you go to universities in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a lot of Chinese and Indian students there. I mean, a lot. Like sometimes it looks like about 70% or more.
Well, you know, it's just if you have a really good school, you're going to draw people from all over the world, and all over the world swamps the U.S. population.
Yes, it does. We're only 330 million here, so.
Yeah, and you go to Asia, which, you know, most of the population of the world. You also get students from Africa. You'll get them from Europe. You'll get them from South America, and you know, so I think that's a good thing. I'm fine with the fact that not everybody at school is white or has English as their first language.
It's all that's Donald Trump.
Well, I was hoping we could get through a whole pub without talking about the orange guy.
It's just so relevant. Let me change the subject from Trump. Nick, let me ask you a question, and forgive my lack of memory, and I continuously fight against my lack of memory. I play chess because of it and all that. I think I've asked you this before. Are you a teacher or a professor of some kind?
No, I'm not. I've never been to university. I went to a podunk rural high school in a podunk county in Oregon, and I never have been back to school since.
I mean, you sound like and are articulately endowed with the talent of articulation in the English language and your apparent research abilities to be a college professor.
No, thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate that. And if somebody wants to,
I'm an idiot compared to you.
If somebody wants to give me a position, I won't refuse it.
Well, Patrick,
you make me feel stupid, you know.
My grandfather was pulled out of school after the 3rd grade, but he was a very well-read man who was considered the best historian in his area.
Nick never ceases to amaze me. I can't articulate, you know, for I mean, obviously, Paul, you have a much better education than I ever had, and you're not you're a smart guy, but you don't even have nor is near the articulation. Nick just the words just roll off his tongue. You and me are both like humana, and I'm worse than you, Paul, because I know less than you. But
well, I'm an
Nick
engineer.
I
think in quantities, not.
I noticed that. Anyway, but seriously, Nick.
Yeah, well, I will admit I love the English language, and you
don't just love the English language. You come up with this. You know, this person wrote a book, and that person wrote a book, and you remember these books. I was like, whew.
I spent almost 50 years reading.
Must take a lot of vitamin B12 or something. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it helps to read books. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I read books too, but I don't always remember everything.
My grandfather had like I said, a 3rd grade education, had a very large library, and not all of it was in English. Some of it was in French, and he
smart guy.
He was talented and hardworking and persistent, and he was considered an authority on local history, and he wrote a family history that he self-published. I still have a couple of copies of it, and he he was into genealogy and all that, and I think I think that autodidacts are there's a long tradition of that. We talked about James Hutton earlier. Now, he did have a formal education, but he was certainly an autodidact in geology, and a brilliant man. And that's so there's I mean there's, and some of this, like I said, some of the smartest people I know have never been to college, so or they maybe went to trade school or something like that, but not to college. So,
well, without getting too much into detail, because we're still live here, Nick, if you don't mind, generally speaking, what do you do as a living?
What do I do for work?
Yeah.
I work in a family business. About the same time I was born, my father started a trucking company. So when I got out of school, I had a very strong dislike of school and schooling. And so my father was willing to give me a job as a driver. So I spent more than a dozen years as a full-time truck driver. And then in
Wow,
I think 1990s.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say you must have been really interesting at a truck stop.
I was all local driving in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't do any over-the-road stuff. So I was I actually drove between Portland, Oregon, which is the biggest city in Oregon, and several stops on the coast: Astoria, Seaside, Warrenton, and Hammond. I made that trip over the Coast Range. I estimate more than 2,000 times in my 10 years of doing that. So I said to my dad in 1997, I can't do this anymore. This has made me into a zombie. It was a horrible split shift. So ever since then, I've been doing paperwork, and it's I have nothing good to say about the transportation industry. I'm sorry to say. I can tell you everything bad about it, but I can't tell you anything good about it.
But it's paper. It's paperwork for the transportation.
Well, it's in the middle of the night, and you have to get a tow truck, and property damage and fatalities and injuries and it's just every bad thing you can imagine happens.
Well, that's what you do. Wow.
And we don't make any. We haven't made a profit in like 7 years or something.
You look sort of young enough to just go ahead and apply for a professorship at it.
Oh, yeah, but nobody's going to give me one unless I jump through their hoops, and I'm not willing to jump through.
You have to have
hoops.
credentials.
Yeah, you have to have credentials, and I have no credentials.
Well, you can tell them that Pat Man sent you.
Okay, you can write me that'll be my first credential.
I'll write you a letter of recommendation.
on letterhead.
Pat Man, the science enthusiast, says that you should give him the job for the professor.
What you should do is just have you just go to the town square and start walking around and talking about things, and your students will join you and pay you a tuition. The peripatetics.
I always seriously though. Without too much mushy on it, I always learn something in these hangouts when Nick is there, and even if I don't remember half the stuff, I always find a way to remember some of it to try and figure out what I can learn.
Okay, I think, Patrick, we're gonna log off here. We've been on for 2.5 hours, so I should go to bed because I have stuff to do tomorrow. So should everybody. Oh, I know it's not that late out on the West Coast, but
it's 9:24 here.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a new moon, so get out if it's clear, and we'll see you guys sometime soon, I'm sure.
Thanks.
All right.